Hi everyone, this is Jem Nalvan, host of the GGV Publishing Podcast. In this episode, we are going to talk about Tulipmania. For those who follow this podcast but never heard about Tulipmania, you may wonder what it is. Well, Tulipmania refers to a period in the 17th century when Dutch investors bought tulips in large quantities, causing the prices to skyrocket and creating what we call an asset bubble. And then that asset bubble, of course, burst. It is important because it created the very first recorded economic recession based on financial speculation. And based on that, now we know about the Great Depression of 1929, so the stock market crash of 1929, the Great Recession of 2008, and all the recessions that happened in the 19th and 20th century. So Tulipmania basically set the record of economic downturns based on financial speculation. So it is essential to understand that the tulip mania was a speculative frenzy over the sale of tulip bulbs. Tulips were introduced to Europe from Turkey around 1550, and the colorful flowers became a popular but expensive item. So they eventually became an asset. And after it was discovered that the flower could be grown faster from the bulb became highly coveted. The tulip mania caused financial difficulties, especially among the poor. Many novices leveraged savings and mortgaged their goods or tools to take part in the bulb trade. The absolute speculative peak is believed to be an auction on February 5th, 1637, which raised 19,000 guilders. After reaching a peak, tulip prices crashed, leaving tulips holder bankrupt. However, Goldgar found few, if any, actual bankruptcies that could be attributed to tulip mania alone. So now let's dig into the causes and origins of the bubble. So what I gave you initially was some sort of like a summary or an introduction to the topic of the day. So the introduction of the tulip to Europe is often questionably attributed to Auguste de Busquet. I apologize for my pronunciation here. He was the ambassador of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who sent the first tulip bulb and seeds to Vienna in 1554 from the Ottoman Empire. Tulip bulbs, along with other new plants like potatoes, pepper, tomatoes, and other vegetables, came to Europe in the 16th century. These bulbs were soon distributed from Vienna to Augsburg, Antwerp, and Amsterdam. The tulip was in fact different from other flowers known to Europe at the time because of its intense saturated petal color. The appearance of the non-pareil tulip as a status symbol coincided with the rise of newly independent Holland's trade fortune. So it was what we also call the Golden Age. No longer the Spanish Netherlands, its economic resources could now be channeled into commerce, and Holland embarked on its Golden Age. Amsterdam merchants were at the center of the lucrative East Indies trade, where one voyage could yield profits of 400%. Traditionally in Holland, the buying and selling of tulip bulbs occurred during the summer after the flower had bloomed in June and the bulb was lifted from the soil to be wrapped in paper and kept dry indoors before being replanted in October, where it remained in the ground through the winter until the next flowering season. So these months were the dry bulb time, when the connoisseur, also known as Liefhebber, first viewed the blossoming flower, and after the leaves had yellowed and withered during senescence, some weeks later inspected the bulb, Payment was made, delivery were taken, and by the beginning of the fall, it was the tulip bed of the new owner. So, by about 1634, however, there was a fundamental shift in how bulbs were traded. They now were sold by weight while still in the ground, and with only a promissory note to indicate detail of the bulb, including its weight at planting and when it will be lifted. The bulb themselves, the delivery of which was months away, were not sold. Only those paper promises. So that's when futures contracts were introduced in financial speculation. Weight was measured in asen, an exceedingly small unit specific to tulips and equal to about 1/20th of gram of an ounce. Paying by weight was a fairer way to assess prices, with a smaller immature bulb costing less than a mature one. But it also increased the price of the heavier bulb. That being said, and heavier bulbs tend to have more offsets and bulblets form at the base of the mother bulb, which were separated and sold individually. So a tulip bulb may produce 2 or 3 offsets a year, and then only for several years before it became too innervated to reproduce. Propagating from these offsets, which can take from 1 to 3 years to become flowering bulbs themselves, necessarily limited the number of bulbs on the market. But unlike seeds, which can take from like 7 to 12 years to blossom, it was the only way to ensure that the tulips would be genetically identical. That being said, a bulb with offset obviously had greater value, but it could not be sold too soon. To do so would limit the ability of the grower to produce any more of that variety and only make it available to others, potentially rivals, which is why price bulbs always were in short supply and commanded such a high price. And because a bulb planted in October likely would weigh substantially more when lifted in the following June, it encouraged speculation in the interim. Even if the price per asen did not change, the value of the bulb could multiply 3 to 5 times during those 8 or so months, if only because of its increased weight. Contrary to pay a specified price at lifting, buyers speculate that the bulb would have greater value in the future than the promissory note, which then could be sold to a new buyer in the hope of realizing a profit. So that's when the bubble was forming. No longer the province of Liefheber's bulbs began to be purchased by the weather, the brewer, the baker. So anyone, any person in society at that time in the Dutch society could purchase those promissory notes. And for a modest investment, often paid for in kind when there was no cash at the time, these poorer craftsmen and artisans speculated in the common varieties that were the stock of mass trade. Such speculation was risky, of course. Having put everything down on deposit, if the price of the tulip bulbs were to drop before lifting, they would not be the means to pay the remaining balance. Nevertheless, novices continued to enter the market and speculation increased until between December 1636 and January 1637. It reached its height. As a result, tulips rapidly became a coveted luxury item, and a profusion of varieties followed. They were classified in groups: the single-hued tulip of red, yellow, or white were known as the coloran or the multicolored rosen. White streak on a red pink background. Violeten in Dutch, white streak and on a purple and lilac background. And the rarest of all, the bizarden, the bizarres, yellow or white streaks on a red, brown, or purple background. So the multicolor effect of intricate lines and the flame-like streaks on the petals were vivid and spectacular, making the bulbs that produce these even more exotic-looking plants highly sought after. It is now known that this effect is due to the bulbs being infected with a type of tulip-specific mosaic virus known as the tulip breaking virus, so called because it breaks the one petal color into two or more. So at that period in history, we see that the speculative bubble was at its peak. People who did not have any understanding of financial markets entered that market, putting their life savings, everything they own, so that they could make more profit without understanding price movements. And this had dire consequences. So Tulipmania reached its peak during the winter of 1636, early 1637, when some contracts were changing hands 5 times. No deliveries were ever made to fulfill these contracts because in February 1637, tulip bulb contract prices collapsed abruptly, and the trade of the tulips ground to a halt. A contemporary satire suggests that the crisis started to unravel on February 3rd in Haarlem, not Harlem, United States, but Haarlem in the Netherlands, where an auctioneer failed to find willing buyers, despite lowering the asking price several times. The actual circumstances of the crash are unknown. The collapse seems to have occurred by the end of the first week of February 1637, which caused a number of disputes over the extant contract. At the 7th of February, tulip growers scrambled in Utrecht to elect representatives for a national assembly in Amsterdam, and their situation had become uncertain as the buyers no longer had any interest in honoring the contract. There was no legal basis for enforcing them. And by the end of February 1637, the representatives gathered in Amsterdam for deliberations. They decided on a compromise where all contracts entered before December 1636 would be binding, but later contracts would be cancelled by paying a fee amounting to a 10% of the price. The matter was brought before the Court of Holland, which declined to rule one way or the other and referred the question back to the City Council. The legislature of Holland decided to cancel all contracts to allow fresh deals to be struck during the summer. In Haarlem, the issue dragged on since the government left it to the parties to solve the issues by arbitration and other means. In May, the city ruled that buyers could cancel any extant contract to a fee of 3.5% of the price. The Dutch court system remained busy with a number of tulip disputes throughout 1639. In the end, most contracts were simply never honored. So the bubble burst in February 1637 led to devastating consequences such as financial losses and social upheavals. Many investors lost their fortunes as bubble prices plummeted. Some even faced bankruptcies. The crash erodes trust and caused social unrest with accusation of frauds and broken promises, as I aforementioned. But what is interesting, as I said at the beginning of this episode, is that Tulipmania developed the practice of futures contract, which allowed speculation on future bulbs prices without needing physical possession, accelerating prices increases. And futures contract is what is used today in the commodity market. So let's say, for example, you want to buy oil. We're not going to deliver a barrel of oil at your doorstep. You simply use futures contract to buy and sell oil on the market. And that's what Tulipmania was able to bring. But the lesson to remember from this saga, from this crazy episode, is how sometimes people can be irrational. How greed and fear drives behavior in the market. It's important to understand that the market is all about psychology. Understand people incentive. As Charlie Munger said, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. If you're able to understand people's incentive, you can predict pretty much anything related to human beings, to human relations, human affairs. We always act based on incentive. The people who got into the sale of tulips, the trade of tulips, while they have no sophisticated knowledge of financial market, did that because all they cared about, it was not even the tulip, it was not even the flower. What they cared about is the profit they were going to make on trading those promissory notes. Some people made a lot of money during that time. They were even able to buy mansions because the price of tulips kept increasing. So tulip mania basically set the precedent of economic crisis. What you realize is that economic crisis that happened never happened in the consumer good markets. It always happened in the asset markets, right? Because assets, the production of assets usually takes longer, right? As we saw with tulips, like you have to plant it in during the fall, so between September and November, and you got to wait until June for that flower to groom, to so that you can have it in your garden or use it or whatever you want to do with it. So that's the thing with assets. Assets are basically used, or the production takes longer and they're used for delayed consumption. So when you look at the stock market crash, it was pretty much the same pattern. People who did not really understand how stocks work still put the money. They even took loans from banks to invest in the stock market without doing the due diligence. They were investing based on word of mouth. Someone will come and say, hey, you should buy this stock because in the future it's going to go to the roof. You don't do your due diligence. You don't study their financial documents such as, the cash flow, the income statement, the balance sheet. You study none of that. You put your money in it and you expect a miracle to happen. So sophisticated investors, on the other hand, are the ones who know when to exit their positions. And that's what they did. So the sophisticated ones knew that, okay, now we are at the height of the bubble. It's time for me to leave. It's time for me, as we say, it's time for me to bounce. And then the novice one, the ones who do not understand how financial markets work, enter these markets at the time where the asset is overpriced. So basically, they're paying for an asset whose value is way below the price way below the price they paid for. Excuse me. And therefore, by the time they enter that market, it's too late. Prices fall and they have to incur a massive loss. And for those who did that with borrowed money, let us not forget that they have to pay that money with interest. So it is very challenging. That's why it's important to understand Tulipmania, what caused it, what are the consequences, and how all the following financial and economic crises that happened based on financial speculations were pretty much the same. They all follow the same pattern. So I hope you guys understood about Tulipmania. Of course, this subject is not the first to be addressed. You have channels like Patrick Boyd that talk about it. Many people who are expert in finance talk about Tulipmania because it is the first recorded economic crisis to happen based on financial speculation. But I wanted to talk about this subject in very layman terms for people to understand how it works, so that, without using too many technical terms. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please do not forget to subscribe to the GGV Publishing Podcast, and I will see you guys next time.